Welcome to Fred Dinenage's Murder Casebook Re-Opened. I'm Hayley Rhodes, and this, of course, is Fred Dinenage. How are you doing?
I'm okay, and I'm quite keen to talk about our man today because he really is one of the most vicious killers ever, I believe, in the history of British crime.
It is an amazing case. So this is a saga that spread fear across the north of England in the 1970s. It's the case of, as the newspapers dubbed him, the Black Panther. He was eventually unmasked as a man called Donald Neilsen. What do we know about his early life? I mean, for a start, he wasn't born Donald Neilsen.
Donald Neilson was born on the 1st of August 1936, just a few miles outside of Bradford. Growing up in wartime Britain meant that family life was tough for the young boy, especially as his father was a strict disciplinarian, something that would rub off on Neilson in later life.
She didn't quite fit in. He's incredibly close to his mother, but when he's 10, his mother dies, and that leads to the first time he gets into trouble.
He was born Donald Nappy, and that's, he always said, part of his problem. Born of a relatively poor family, a small boy in stature. His dad was a strong disciplinarian, very strong, with also a penchant for drink as well. When he was at school, because of his stature and also because of his surname, Nappy, he was bullied by the other children. Nappy spelled N-A-P-P-E-Y, but of course sounding the same as a baby's nappy, N-A-P-P-Y.
Yeah, no child is going to relish that name.
No, and he was bullied a lot at school. And interestingly enough, eventually when he got married and had a child, a young girl, he legally changed his name from Nappy so that she wasn't bullied in the same way that he'd been bullied when he was at school. So he became Neilson. Why he became Neilson, that's interesting as well. You see, the whole man is fascinating. It's said he could have been called Neilson. He always said it's because he was involved with a taxi business called Neilson, so that's why he adopted the name. But somebody else said, no. He was walking down the road one day, thinking about changing his name. He saw an ice cream van with Neilson on it and thought, I'll call myself Neilson. Complex character.
Yeah, really interesting guy. And obviously that name, it must have affected him growing up. But it wasn't the only thing. I mean, he grew up during the Second World War, real poverty. I mean, I think slum conditions, some people have described it as you said, his mum died when he was 10 or 11 years old.
Yeah.
And I think after that, his dad put a lot of responsibility on him to look after the house, as well as going to school, and as well as still being a child. And I think it was around this time that maybe he started to experiment a little bit with crime, not too much, but I think he was caught trying to rob his local co-op.
Yes.
And he was taken home and kind of, essentially just given a bit of a telling off by the police officer, but I get the impression more than a telling off by his father.
Yeah, I mean, he was involved in petty crime. His dad, I think, beat him up after that particular incident. The turning point, and it could have been the turning point for his whole life for Donald Neilson, was when he was called up into the army, and he saw service with the King's Own light infantry in Kenya, Cyprus, and Aden.
He loved the army, absolutely loved it. He was called up for national service, and he did his normal training. Surprisingly, he failed his Bren gun training, so he had to go and do his 10-week training course all over again. He later said that he'd done that on purpose, and it wouldn't surprise me, actually, because he so loved the army.
He just wanted to carry on.
It was the happiest part of his life so far.
He really thrived.
I think because it involved weapons as well. He was fascinated by guns and artillery and weapons. He loved the discipline of the army.
Yeah, I think he was quite a rigid thinker, and I imagine that
was.
those kind of constraints of the army actually suited him.
Yes, it did. You see, he loved army life. He loved the discipline. So much so that later in his life, when he had a wife and child, they wouldn't go on holidays so much. They'd go on manoeuvres. They'd go to forests and woodland, and he would hide, and his wife and daughter had to try and find him. It was that kind of army thing.
So as well as going out on these bizarre manoeuvres in the park where he'd make his daughter and his wife stalk him or play dead, or all of these bizarre things he made them do, he also seems to have taken his parenting style from his own father, and that he was quite a aggressive disciplinarian.
A strong disciplinarian. He expected every instruction to be obeyed to the word, to the letter. So he was strong in that sense, tough, resilient, no doubt about that at all. He was not an easy man to be with and a bitter man. So yes, he was a strong disciplinarian, and he would have been very much like his own father, I think, very tough on the family. But he loved the army. It was when he came out of the army that things started to unravel and started to go wrong, and he couldn't cope with it.
For the programme, you actually interviewed criminologist David Wilson, and I think his conclusion was that Donald Neilsen felt like the world was stacked against him, that other people were finding it much easier to make money than he was, and that no matter what he did, he was never really going to make it.
He became very bitter once he'd left the army. He couldn't seem to settle into a job. He did joinery, and he was quite good at it. But he felt he wasn't making as much money as he should. And he got very bitter because he felt immigrants coming into the country were being paid more than he was and earning more in benefits than he was. And he developed this thing about rich people. Oh, well, they've got all the money, they've got the cars and everything, and I haven't got it, and why shouldn't I have it? He became really bitter and twisted about all this, and he wanted what he hadn't got. So to get it, he turned to burglary.
So in the 1960s, when he was in his late 20s, he became this incredibly prolific and efficient burglar.
He was incredible. He committed something like 400 burglaries over quite a wide area, all committed at night times and all after the most incredible research. He would research each of the houses that he wanted to burgle, and he made an awful lot of money through burglary.
Neilson began breaking into houses and targeted the middle classes. He believed they were the only people to keep their money at home.
Now, he's incredibly successful as a house burglar. He was never caught by the police. He would keep the newspaper cuttings of the burglaries when they were reported.
He committed something like 400 burglaries, and the police never apprehended him once. He was a very, very good house burglar. But that wasn't enough for him. Mm-hmm. He wanted to make more money, and he hit upon the idea of robbing post offices, because at that time the country was full of small post offices, full of postal orders and money. Mm-hmm. So he started to rob post offices.
Neilson decided to adapt the techniques he'd used for breaking into people's houses to entering small post offices in the middle of the night.
He's usually masked, he's dressed in black, he's clearly wearing gloves, he's carrying a gun. The gun was loaded. This wasn't just for show. He was intending to use these weapons.
And again, his planning was meticulous. It really was. He'd work out what post office he was going to rob. He would recce it.
Yeah.
Then he would go out always at night to rob it, and he would cut off the burglar alarm, and he would break in, and he would find the keys generally either in the office or in the bedroom next to the bed while the sub postmaster and his wife, or it could be a lady postmaster and her husband, were asleep, and he would carry on with his burglary, and he was very, very good at it.
And he was prolific again, and he really spread his crimes across the north of England and moving into the Midlands. And you interviewed, for the programme, you interviewed a journalist called Andy Wright, and he told you that I think that this did really spread fear amongst, once they realised that this community of sub-postmasters was being targeted, there was this fear that actually, any of them thought I could be next.
Yes, there was a real fear, and he was a scary character. He was a scary character, was Neilson, because he always dressed in black, and he always had his face covered with a black face covering. Because he operated at such speed and with such stealth, that's how he eventually got the nickname, the Black Panther. And yes, he was much feared among the post office community. He would go out armed with a gun, a loaded gun, and he was determined he was going to use it if he had to. He only had to use it once in his first 9 robberies, and a post office worker was wounded in that. But it was post office robbery number 10 that the whole thing started to unravel. And that's where his first victim was murdered.
So this was Donald Skepper. So this was 1974, and he broke into the home of the Skepper family, who were, Donald Skepper was a sub-postmaster, and he was looking for a key to get to the money. He couldn't find it, so he woke up the teenage son, who was 18 years old, and said to him, I need the key because I'm going to steal the money. And the son said, my dad has it. And so the son went with him into the father's bedroom. Donald Skepper woke up, and I think his instinct was to launch himself at this masked man that had come into his bedroom in the middle of the night.
This was at Harrogate, a sub-post office at Harrogate in Yorkshire. Yes, the son had woken up or tried to find the key alongside his father's bed. Donald Skepper woke up, went for Neilson, went for him. Neilson fired the gun and killed him. A tremendous shock for the boy and his mother, and that was his first victim. He got away. He got away with it.
If you're constantly getting your money, getting access to your money by committing robbery and never being caught, then it's like going to the office. Has he had a good day at the office? He gets lots of money. A bad day at the office, somebody tries to stop him, he has to shoot them.
And still, I mean, you've got this man who has been burgling houses, now burgling post offices. He's now killed somebody, and still nobody knows who he is, what he looks like. There's been photo fits, but none of them, by all accounts, resembled him in any way. So this is a complete mystery man.
Yes. And then he went to Accrington, to a sub-post office in Accrington, with a sub-postmaster called Derek Aston, an ex-military man. Mm-hmm. And again, he was disturbed. And again, the sub-postmaster went for Neilson. And again, Neilson shot him and killed him. 2 murders.
Yep, so things have really escalated now. He is no longer just, a cat burglar. He is a double murderer by this point.
And a very, very dangerous man.
And he's not stopping. So Derek Aston's murder, that's the second sub-postmaster who's now been murdered in quite a short space of time. So by this point, there must be real fear. This is not a one-off. This is a campaign. It must feel like a campaign of terror against sub-postmasters. And people have no idea who this is.
No, see, he committed 2 murders, and apparently he was getting away with it. And then he went to a post office at a place called Albury in the West Midlands, owned by a couple called the Greylands, and that's where for the first time he made a mistake. Sidney Greyland was the sub-postmaster. He was locking up for the night with his wife. He was downstairs. In came the Black Panther, Neilson. A scuffle started. Neilson shot him. Greyland's wife, Peggy, confronted the Black Panther, and he virtually pistol whipped her. But for some reason, he wasn't wearing his face covering, and she was the first person to actually see the Black Panther's face. Amazingly enough, she survived. She was lucky to survive. She probably only survived. She probably wasn't killed by him, because 2 policemen were passing by at the time, heard noises from inside the post office before the Greylands had locked up.
And saw the lights on, which wouldn't normally have been on at that time of day.
Which made them suspicious, and they investigated and found Peggy Greyland, and that probably saved her life. But still, they couldn't find him.
So he now is somebody that appears to have crossed a boundary into actually finding it quite easy to use violence on people. I think he later would justify it and say, well, I only ever did it when I had to. It was always self-defense. But he does appear to be now finding, he's killed 3 people. He's finding it very easy to commit violence. And for the programme, you actually met with a former armed robber called Tom Carrigan. And he described to you actually what it feels like in that moment when you pull on that mask and you've got your gun and you walk into a building and you know exactly what you're going to do.
Yeah, this man he'd done time for armed robbery. And he was really honest and open about it. And his feeling, he said, once you put on the mask, once you've got the gun in your hand and you're in the post office or the bank or whatever it is, you become a different person. And if you're robbing a post office, for example, the way you look at it is, I'm not stealing someone's money. It's from an institution. It's from the government or whatever. It's not from an individual. So therefore, you see me, I've got a mask on, I've got a gun. If you try and stop me, that's down to you. But you must know that if you try and stop me, I will shoot you. And if necessary, I will kill you. And that's the way he looked at it. He said, once you put on that arm, you're excited. And once you put on that arm, that covering, and you've got the weapon, you can't wait to start.
Yeah.
It's an excitement, you know, and either you've got that or you haven't. And so he had no doubts about it at all.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And in that moment, you don't see anyone as a person or a victim. You just see them as an obstacle to you getting what you've gone there for.
You are all powerful. And Neilson would have felt that as well. You know, he's in the post office. He's got the gun. He's got the rifle. He's powerful, you know, and you are at his mercy. And you know that if you try and stop him, he will shoot you, which he did. And he killed 3 sub-postmasters.
So this obviously has given rise to an enormous police operation. So police forces from across the north of England and the Midlands are actually joining forces, which apparently is relatively unusual. They weren't actually used to collaborating,
but
they had to by this point, and they took tens of thousands of statements. They had something like 2.5 million index cards with statements that they'd taken from people trying to work out how this person, who was already a notorious burglar but is now a triple murderer, trying to find out who this person is. But despite the fact they have this likeness of him, and that's been circulated widely, he still hasn't been identified. They still don't have a name.
And I think at least four police forces were involved in the hunt for Donald Neilsen, the Black Panther. But no, they couldn't, because he'd not left any, they didn't have any fingerprints on file. So they just simply couldn't find out who he was or where he lived. You know, he was getting away with it.
A picture of what he looks like is out there, but you've still got no fingerprints, you've still got no name. The police have no idea who this man is. He should be on the back foot at this point. He should be expecting apprehension at any minute. But what he actually does is taunts the police.
He was cocky because he felt, you know, I'm indestructible. I'm getting away with all this. And he's got all these postal orders that he's robbed from these sub-post offices. And when he cashes them in different parts of the country, he'll often sign his name as beware. In other words, he's sending a message to the police, the authorities. It's me. I'm the one you're looking for. You can't catch me. So he'd sign them with all sorts of odd names, as I say, like beware.
Gosh, that's a real narcissistic streak, isn't it? A real God complex there.
Yeah. Scary. But that's how confident he was.
But he must have felt to an extent like that he was on the run, because he changed tack. So, you know, these post officers started to step up security. Perhaps he felt that they were under too much scrutiny. So he decided to change tack. And in 1975, he launches his next, as he sees it, carefully planned campaign. And this time it's Kidnap for ransom.
Yeah, it was. I think he spent something like 3 years preparing for this kidnap. He'd seen some sort of newspaper article about a family called the Whittles, quite a well-to-do family. And he'd seen something about a vast sum of money being left to the daughter of the owner of this business, Lesley Whittle, only a young girl. She was being left a colossal amount of money, and so was her brother, Ronald. They were both being left money by the father. He'd seen this, and he thought, I could kidnap them and one of them, and hold them to ransom, demand a ransom. And really, originally, he wanted the son, he wanted Ronald. That was he was going to kidnap him first of all. But then he changed his mind and went for the young girl, Lesley Whittle, and she was only a teenager. He really researched this as he researched everything. He found out where she lived. He broke in at the dead of night.
So she was in bed in her home in Shropshire, 17 years of age.
Yes.
Sleeping, and the Black Panther breaks into her bedroom.
Yeah, with a gun, as usual. And abducted her, took her away, kidnapped her. Can you imagine the terror that girl was going through? Because he was going to demand a ransom of £50,000. And he took her to a park, Bathpool Park at Kidsgrove in Staffordshire, and he actually put her inside a drainage hole in the ground. And I went to that park,
No one knew back in 1975 that 17-year-old Lesley was being held hostage in a drainage ditch like that, with a wire noose around her neck.
All that she would have heard during that time is the vermin down in the shaft moving about down there. She wouldn't have heard voices or anything of that nature from ground level.
I mean, she was hidden sort of underground with a wire noose around her neck.
On a kind of platform.
On a ledge, with vermin all around her, in the dark. Can you imagine the terror of that?
It's absolutely horrific.
You know, and we actually went to that park, and it's a pleasant enough place, but when you'd thought about what had happened there to this poor young girl, it was chilling.
Yeah, you met with Harold Wright, who was one of the detectives who investigated the case. She wouldn't have known where she was. She'd been taken in the dead of night, taken in the back of a car, apparently hidden under some kind of foam mattress, so she wouldn't know where she was.
No.
And then she finds herself in this dark, wet tunnel underground where all she can hear is rats.
Absolutely dreadful. An absolute nightmare. For the whole thing would have been, you can't imagine what it would have been like for this innocent young girl, balanced on this ledge with some wire around her neck, horrible creatures around her feet. All she can hear, it's pitch black, all she can hear is the sound of an occasional train passing by, and she's there for hours and hours and hours, all by herself. Absolutely terrifying. In the meantime, Neilson demands a £50,000 ransom from her brother.
He'd actually left a box of Turkish delights in their living room with a note in something called Dymo tape. This note that Neilson, that Black Panther, had left for the Whittle family said not to tell the police, said, pay me this ransom, but don't tell the police. I mean, they sensibly did go to the police, and the police wanted to keep control of everything, didn't they? So they said not to tell the press.
Yes, and of course the press inevitably found out about it and ran the story. So it was out in the open. And the police are saying, don't pay the ransom. But of course, you know, Whittle wanted his sister back. He wanted her back safely. So he thought he would pay the ransom. And money was to be left in a telephone box, etc. But the whole thing was a complete mess because the press were on the story. When he got to the phone box, apparently the press were already there. The whole thing was an absolute disaster.
It does seem that what was a crystal clear plan in Donald Neilson's head about how everything was going actually was fraught with potential missteps. And that is what happened repeatedly, that there was this plan that they were supposed to follow that would mean that Ronald Whittle, the brother, gave him the ransom money, and Lesley Whittle supposedly would have been returned to her family safely. Yeah. But there were so many misfires along the way, and what he thought was a crystal clear plan was not crystal clear to anybody else.
I think Neilson overthought it. You know, he'd been so used to this meticulous planning of all the post office robberies, etc., and the house robberies before that. I think he'd overthought it. He'd overcomplicated it, you know. Quite a simple, what should have been a relatively simple transaction. You give me the money, I'll give you your sister back. He overcomplicated it, and it all went terribly, terribly wrong.
An illustration of how Donald Neilson's sort of best laid plans were actually fraught with potential missteps. So David Wilson actually took you on a scavenger hunt in the park to try and illustrate this point.
Yes, it was really to illustrate what Neilson had done was when the first attempt to get the ransom money had failed, he then invited Lesley Whittle's brother to this Bathpool Park where she was incarcerated, and he was going to leave messages written on dyno tape instructing him what to do next, to leave the money, to get his sister back. Again, overcomplicating it.
Over the next 5 days, Ron Whittle failed several times to deliver the ransom. The clues he was given had no punctuation, were ambiguous, and only made sense to Neilson himself.
Professor David Wilson took me to a park, and he'd left dyno messages all over this park for me to follow to find a parcel.
So each one was a series of clues that should have led you to the next clue.
Yes, but you see, because Neilson wasn't clear enough and his grammar wasn't clear enough and precise enough, David Wilson illustrated to me how complex this was. go to this tree. Which tree? There's 2 or 3 trees there. Turn right there and then turn left, or whatever. And it seems simple, but it's incredibly complex. And I couldn't find the parcel that David Wilson had left, and a bit of the dino tape had gone missing. So it seemed simple in theory.
And that had happened in real life. I think that a bit of dino tape had been left stuck inside a telephone box.
Yes.
And it had slipped down behind a board that was kind of nailed to the back of the telephone box.
Yes.
And so it wasn't even easy to find it. And so there were all of these things. And I think also just Donald Neilson, I think his thinking was so rigid that he couldn't understand that other people's perception was different to his.
Exactly.
So what he thought was a clear instruction was anything but. I mean, I can also only imagine how Ronald Whittle felt as he was trying to follow these clues which weren't clear, and the absolute rising panic that he must have felt, because knowing that all of this, the safety of his little sister, rested on him following these instructions to drop off this money.
Which he couldn't do.
No, and he must have felt absolutely desperate.
Yeah, he was in absolute panic, panicking all the time. And his little sister was still on this ledge, still with this wire round her neck,
The last clue took him to Bathpool Park, where he waited for a torchlight to flash at him. But again, he'd misread Neilson's instructions and was in the wrong place.
Neilson was obviously watching from a vantage point. Ron Whittle had been directed to look for Neilson flashing a light, a torch. Neilson saw, in fact, a police car early on. He said he saw a helicopter, something denied by the police. And he started to believe that a police operation had been put together. So he was spooked.
Unbelievable. And in the end, he couldn't work it out, because Donald Neilson had overthought the whole thing, This meticulous planning that had gone into all the post office robberies, this time let him down badly.
Yeah.
And let Lesley Whittle down even more.
And that's the thing. So the money drop was never made. Donald Neilson stopped communicating with the Whittle family. Everything went quiet. And it was, I think, 7 weeks later that finally the police did another search of Bathpool Park, and they found this tunnel system underneath the park.
Yes, and the poor girl had fallen off the ledge and had hung herself.
And so Harold Wright was the detective that you interviewed, and he was the one who found her body.
He was, and he was a father himself, and he could visualise the absolute terror that this poor girl had gone through, being stuck in this shaft for so many hours and days until finally falling to her death. Dreadful story.
And apparently very emaciated when she was found. She hadn't eaten for days before she died.
No, a terrifying and awful death.
Yeah, absolutely awful. And still, so now you've got the Black Panther associated with 4 murders.
Yes.
And still they don't know who he is. They don't know his name. They don't know who they're looking for. And months go by with no moves forward in this case. As we've said, thousands of statements taken, millions of index cards with information. And it was actually by chance that he was caught in the end.
Totally by chance. He's walking along the road. 2 policemen are sat in a car, just making notes on what they'd done the night before, when one of them looks up and sees Donald Neilson walking along with I think a rucksack, and thinks to himself and says to his mate in the car, I don't like the look of him. We ought to stop and ask him what he's up to. Give us some identification. So they pulled up alongside him and said, who are you? Tell us who you are.
And you met with one of these PCs for the programme, a guy called Stuart Mackenzie, and he described to you how what they thought was just a routine stop took a very unexpected turn.
See that chap there, I don't like the way he's walking. Something wrong with him. So he says, come on, let's go and check him out. So I drove the car and we pulled up at the side of him. Tony then wound the window down of the car and said, good evening, sir. Would you mind telling us your details? And the next thing I hear is, don't move, any tricks and you're dead. To which I sort of looked to me left and saw that I was looking down the business end of a sawn-off shotgun.
It made Tony White get in the back of the car. He climbed into the front alongside Stuart Mackenzie and said, drive. So Mackenzie's driving. He's got a gun being held against him. He's looking in his rearview mirror at Tony White, thinking, "What we're going to do here? What can I've got to get this gun away from me. He could shoot me. He could kill me." So he starts to drive, and then he thinks, "Right, I'm going to swerve this car, and it'll pull him off balance." So he starts to swerve the car and brake it suddenly. The result was Tony White was the one who actually got shot. The gun went off, hit White, didn't kill him, but injured him. So now they're in real trouble. Mackenzie's driving a bit further, and he thinks, I'm going to do a sudden turn here. Did a sudden turn, and the impact of that enabled him to get that gun.
Yes, he rolled out of the car, I think, and I think they'd mounted the curb outside a fish and chip shop.
Yeah, and people in the fish and chip shop came running out to help them apprehend Neilson, and in actual fact, Neilson got quite badly beaten up.
You see the photos of him afterwards. I think the crowd, they did their duty plus a bit, I think.
Yeah, and so these two coppers managed to arrest Donald Neilson after all this time.
And Tony White recovered.
Tony White recovered. Stuart Mackenzie, I think to this day, still relives that incredible moment. And these two policemen were both honoured.
They were commended by the Queen, weren't they?
They were, absolutely. And Donald Neilson was finally apprehended. And finally they realised this was the man they wanted.
Yeah, so I think they looked in his backpack. So he had obviously the sawn-off shotgun, but they looked in his backpack and there was a balaclava, and they put two and two together. And then when they searched his house and went up in the attic, that's when they realised they definitely had got their man.
The police searched Neilson's house and quickly discovered the attic. There they found his cache of weapons.
We recovered so many exhibits at the house, we didn't need him to confess to the crime.
You'd got him back to
We
rights.
got enough evidence to put him before the court and say to the jury, well, you decide.
Absolutely right, yeah. All these guns, all these weapons, this was the man.
A document that with planning, meticulous planning for the kidnap, although obviously, as we know, it didn't go to plan, but there was cuttings, hundreds of newspaper cuttings from all of the crimes that he'd committed. So really did hand it to them on a plate, really, in terms of evidence.
Because as Professor Wilson said, a lot of serial offenders, serial criminals, like to keep newspaper clippings of the crimes they've committed. You know, it's like a sort of little family album of their clippings. It's a kind of vanity thing.
I mean, and he was a real narcissist, so that's not surprising.
Yeah, absolutely. So he loved to read about himself and the crimes he committed.
So he was charged not only with Lesley Whittle's murder and kidnap, but also with the murders of the three sub-postmasters.
Correct.
And then when it went to trial, his barrister successfully argued that the two things should be dealt with separately so they didn't prejudice one another. So in the first instance, he was tried for Lesley Whittle's kidnap and murder, and he admitted to her kidnap, but he denied her murder. He said that I did not push her off that ledge. She fell off a ledge, and it was just, an unfortunate bit of collateral damage, really.
Yeah, but he wasn't going to get away with that, was he?
Well, he wasn't. Actually, he gave himself away in his evidence.
He did.
He said, I had no reason to kill her. She'd never seen my face. I was going to release her.
Yeah.
And then, as Andy Wright, the journalist, told you, then another bit of his evidence actually gave himself away because he talked about the point when she saw an expression.
She saw his face.
Yeah.
And he actually admitted that then. He said, she saw the fear on my face.
Yeah.
And that's...
And then everyone knew that it had been a lie, that she'd never seen his face. And so he had motive to kill her.
Yes, he did. And he was found guilty of that.
I've been to many court cases about serial offenders. They rarely take the stand. Neilson wanted to go and put his side of the story because he believed he had a side to describe. It's an incredibly arrogant attitude.
And even then, in explaining what had happened, he didn't really take any responsibility for anything he'd done.
No, like so many serial killers, he tried to put all the blame on the people that he'd attacked. Well, if they hadn't attacked me, if they hadn't defended themselves, they'd have been all right. You see, but they didn't. So therefore, I had no option but to kill them. Which is absolutely no defence at all. But it goes back to our armed robber, doesn't it? He was saying, well, people know the rules. You know, I've got a face covering on, I've got a gun. So you know the rules. You give in, you do what you're told, because if you don't, I'm going to kill you. But that's no defence, you see.
Well, Donald Neilsen even went a step further and he tried to portray this as a victimless crime. I was only stealing from the state. I was stealing from post offices. It's public money.
Yeah.
There were no victims here. Just handily forgetting all of the people that he'd killed and their traumatised families. And the fact that, you know, the victims just multiply.
Yeah. So he could exonerate himself from any real blame, you see. But of course, that's absolute nonsense, you know. He left behind a trail of death and destruction and broken families. Awful, awful, particularly in the case of dear Lesley Whittle.
Yes, and then his barrister again tried to argue that he shouldn't be tried for the 3 sub-postmasters, that they should be allowed to just lie on file as part of his record, but that wouldn't be justice.
No, absolutely. So he went down for that as well. So 3 post office workers killed and Lesley Whittle, 4 murders.
He really did look a little bit evil, menacing. The one time that really stands out for me was when he was handed a weapon, one of the sawn-off shotguns that he'd used in his raids, and just in front of him were all the exhibits. There were 2 rows of exhibits, and there were shells from those guns, and he was handed the gun, and he literally turned it around like that, and everybody in the press box and in the galleries and so on all instinctively ducked.
So the sentence was a whole life tariff, and does that seem like the right outcome to you?
Absolutely. This was a brutal, cold-hearted, merciless killer. Killed 3 sub-postmasters, almost killed a 4th, and murdered this poor, innocent teenage girl, Lesley Whittle.
So, I mean, the jury had every reason to convict, really.
Yeah. He died a horrible death, which is no more, to be fair, than he deserved. He was in Norwich prison. He developed motor neurone disease. He was taken to Norwich University Hospital, and that's where he died. And really, honestly, with the best will in the world, you can't feel any sympathy for the Black Panther. He got what he deserved.
The list of Donald Neilsen's crimes makes shocking reading. He committed over 400 robberies, 2 attempted murders, and carried out 4 brutal killings.
It feels like once he'd crossed that line, there really were no limits to what he was willing to do.
No, because he could excuse in his own mind everything that he'd done, but he was a cold-hearted, callous killer. Dreadful man, Donald Neilsen. Certainly one of Britain's most evil killers.
He really was. Thank you so much for talking me through this case, the Black Panther. That's all from us for now, and we'll see you next time.